I used to believe that if you stayed quiet, stayed dignified, and stayed generous, people would naturally respect you. That belief died at my son's wedding. Before I begin, let me ask you something. If you believe stories about family, dignity, and quiet strength still matter in this world, please like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read them all, and it helps more than you know. Now, let me take you back to the moment everything changed. The ballroom was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung low from the ceiling, casting warm golden light over linen-covered tables and polished marble floors. Soft orchestral music floated through the air, the kind you hear at weddings where money is never mentioned out loud, but always felt. Every detail was perfect because I made sure it was. I paid for every single part of that night. The venue, the food, the flowers flown in from out of state, even the custom place cards written in calligraphy. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because I'm a mother, and because when my son Ethan Lawson told me he wanted this wedding to be special, I said yes without hesitation. I always had. I stood near the edge of the room holding a glass of champagne I hadn't tasted. I was wearing a sapphire blue dress, tailored but modest. I've never liked flashy things. Real security doesn't sparkle, it sits quietly. Across the room, Ethan stood beside his bride, Vanessa Clark. She looked radiant, confident, comfortable in the attention. My son, on the other hand, looked tense. His smile was practiced, his shoulders slightly stiff, like someone trying very hard to belong somewhere he wasn't entirely sure he fit. I raised him alone after my husband, Robert Lawson, passed away. I worked, I built, I sacrificed. I taught Ethan that character mattered more than appearances, that kindness wasn't weakness. Standing there that night, I wondered where those lessons had gone. Then Vanessa lifted her champagne glass. At first, I thought she was about to make a toast. People around her quieted, smiling, ready to listen. Her family gathered close, well-dressed, polished, confident in the way people are when they've never had to worry about tomorrow. Vanessa smiled. And then she pointed at me. "This," she said lightly, almost playfully, "is the woman we have to put up with now." For a moment, my mind refused to process the words. Surely I misheard her. But then they laughed, not raucously, not crudely, they laughed politely, smoothly, comfortably. Her cousins chuckled, her aunts smirked, her mother smiled without protest. Even strangers joined in, people who didn't know me at all, but knew enough to understand that mocking someone like me was apparently acceptable in this room. I felt something inside my chest tighten, and then go completely numb. I didn't say a word, I didn't step forward, I didn't defend myself, I didn't even lower my gaze. I stood perfectly still. I searched the room for my son. Ethan was standing right beside her. He wasn't laughing. But he wasn't stopping her either. His eyes were on the floor. That hurt more than anything else. Vanessa continued, enjoying the attention. "You know how it is," she added casually. "Family comes with obligations." More laughter. In that moment, I understood something painful and very clear. They didn't see me as generous. They didn't see me as kind. They didn't even see me as a mother. They saw me as an inconvenience. I considered quietly leaving. Slipping out without causing a scene. I've spent most of my life choosing peace over confrontation. I thought maybe that was still the right choice. Then I noticed a sudden shift near the head table. Vanessa's father, Harold Clark, had stopped smiling. His face had gone pale, like all the blood had drained from it at once. He was staring directly at me, not with amusement, not with judgment, with confusion, then something else. Recognition. He set his glass down slowly as if his hands had forgotten how to function. The room began to quiet, not because anyone intended it to, but because his body language demanded attention. He took a step toward me. "Wait," he said, his voice louder than he meant it to be. "Are you Judith Lawson?" I nodded once. The silence was immediate and complete. Harold swallowed hard. "Judith Lawson, as in Lawson Holdings?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He looked like a man who had just realized the ground beneath his feet was an illusion. "Because," he continued, his voice unsteady now, "if you are, then you're my new boss." You could hear a pin drop. Vanessa turned sharply toward him. "Dad, what are you talking about?" she snapped, irritation creeping into her voice. But Harold wasn't looking at her anymore, he was looking at me. And in that moment, standing in a room full of people who had laughed at me, I finally understood the truth. They thought I was nothing. And the reason it hurt so badly was because I had helped them believe it. But what they didn't know, what they were about to learn, was that silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's restraint. And the woman they mocked that night was about to change all of their lives. And what happened after that wedding forced my son to face a truth he had spent years running from. That silence after Harold Clark's words followed me all night, even when the music started again, even when people pretended nothing had happened, even when my son finally looked at me too late. I left the reception early. Not because I was embarrassed, but because I was suddenly exhausted in a way sleep could never fix. I remember sitting alone in the back seat of my car, heels kicked off, hands folded in my lap, staring out the window as the city lights blurred past. I kept asking myself one question: how did I become so easy to dismiss? To understand that night, you have to understand who I was long before the wedding, long before anyone decided I was someone to put up with. I wasn't born into wealth. I married into responsibility. My husband, Robert Lawson, and I didn't start with much. When we were young, we shared a tiny apartment with creaky floors and a radiator that never quite worked. He had ambition. I had discipline. Together, we built something steady, slowly, carefully, without shortcuts. Then cancer took him. Ethan was 12 when his father died. One day, I was a wife planning for the future. The next, I was a widow raising a grieving boy who needed strength I wasn't sure I had. So I became it anyway. I learned how to sit in boardrooms where men assumed I was the assistant. I learned how to make decisions while packing school lunches. I learned how to be firm without being cruel and generous without being foolish, or at least I thought I had. I built Lawson Holdings quietly, no flashy interviews. No magazine covers, no social climbing. I believed real power didn't need validation. Ethan grew up surrounded by stability but not excess. I wanted him to appreciate effort, not entitlement. He went to good schools, wore clean clothes, never went hungry, but he wasn't handed everything without question. At least not at first. As he got older, the world changed him. College introduced him to people who measured success by appearances. Business school taught him how to speak confidently about things he hadn't yet earned. And somewhere along the way, he started seeing my quiet life as small. He never said it outright, but I felt it. The subtle impatience when I asked questions, the way he brushed off my advice, the discomfort when his friends asked what I did for a living. He preferred vague answers. She's in real estate. She's retired. She's comfortable, as if everything I'd built had simply happened. Then he met Vanessa. From the beginning, I sensed the imbalance. Her family was loud about their wealth. Their stories were always bigger, their opinions firmer, their laughter sharper. I didn't mind. I'd met many people like them in business. What I didn't expect was how quickly Ethan tried to reshape himself to fit their world. He started talking about expectations, about how things are done in their circles, about how important impressions were. When he asked me to help with the wedding, he didn't ask like a son. He asked like someone negotiating a transaction. "Mom, this is important. Mom, they're used to a certain standard. Mom, I don't want to look inadequate." That last word stayed with me. Inadequate. I should have stopped there. I should have asked harder questions. I should have wondered why a man raised with love felt he had to buy acceptance. But I didn't, because I was still his mother. And mothers sometimes confuse sacrifice with love, so I said yes. Yes to the venue. Yes to the guest list. Yes to costs that kept climbing without explanation. Every time my instincts whispered caution, I silenced them with the same excuse: this is for my son. What I didn't realize, what no one tells you, is that generosity without boundaries doesn't create gratitude. It creates entitlement. Somewhere between the deposits and the planning meetings, I stopped being Ethan's mother and became the background figure. The checkbook. The safety net. The thing that made his life easier but didn't deserve acknowledgement. And Vanessa, she only knew the version of me Ethan described, not the woman who built an empire, not the woman who survived loss and carried on, not the woman who paid for the celebration she was mocked at. She knew the version that was manageable, dismissible. That night at the wedding didn't come out of nowhere. It was the result of months, maybe years, of quiet erasure. And as I sat in my car, parked outside my empty house, I finally understood something that frightened me more than the insult itself. I had trained them to believe my silence meant acceptance. But silence, once broken, has a way of changing everything. And the next morning, when my phone rang before sunrise, I realized the reckoning had already begun. The morning after the wedding, I woke up before sunrise. Not because I had somewhere to be, not because I was rested, but because my mind refused to stay quiet. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands, replaying the night again and again, not Vanessa's words, but my son's silence. That image followed me everywhere. The way Ethan had stood beside his wife while I was mocked, his eyes fixed on the floor like a child hoping a problem would disappear if he didn't look at it. I didn't call him. I wanted to hear from him first. Hours passed. Then my phone buzzed, not with his name, but with a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. A former colleague, someone who still moved easily in the same social circles as Vanessa's family. Judith, I don't know if I should say this, but something about last night didn't sit right with me. My stomach tightened. We spoke later that afternoon, carefully, quietly. The way people do when they're about to say something that can't be unsaid. She hesitated, then finally said it. They weren't surprised by what Vanessa said, they expected it. Expected it. According to her, the jokes had started long before the wedding. At engagement dinners, at private gatherings, comments made when I wasn't present about how Ethan's mother was a bit much, how I hovered, how I used money to stay relevant. I felt my chest tighten. Those words hadn't come from Vanessa, they had come from Ethan, my own son. Suddenly, things began to make sense, the rehearsed insult, the confidence with which Vanessa had humiliated me, the way her family laughed without hesitation. They weren't reacting in the moment, they were continuing a narrative, one my son had helped create. I confronted him that evening, not angrily, not accusingly. I invited him over for dinner like I always had. He arrived tense, avoiding my eyes, already defensive. Vanessa didn't come. Is everything okay? He asked, forcing a smile. I looked at him for a long moment before answering. No, I said softly, it isn't. He stiffened. I asked him one question. Ethan, what have you been telling your wife about me? He laughed nervously. What? Nothing bad. Why would you think that? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him. I simply repeated the question. The silence stretched. Finally, he exhaled sharply and looked away. I might have vented a little. Vented. I asked him to explain, and then the truth spilled out, not all at once but in fragments. Complaints dressed up as jokes. Frustrations disguised as concern. He told her I was too involved. That I used money to stay close. That I had trouble letting go. I felt like I was listening to a stranger describe someone else. Ethan, I said carefully, when have I ever controlled your life? He didn't answer directly. Instead, he said something that cut deeper than any insult. I just didn't want them to think I needed you. There it was. The truth he'd never admitted, even to himself. My success embarrassed him. My support made him feel small. To fit into Vanessa's world, he needed me to be less visible, less important, less respected. So he reshaped me in his stories, and once those stories took hold, they no longer belonged to him. They belonged to everyone who laughed at my expense. I realized then that the wedding humiliation wasn't an accident. It was the final act of a quiet campaign. And the most painful part wasn't Vanessa's cruelty, it was my son's betrayal. Because while I was paying for the celebration, he was quietly preparing them to disrespect me. I didn't argue with him, I didn't cry, I simply told him something he didn't expect to hear. You don't get to be ashamed of the same woman you rely on. He looked stunned. I raised you to stand on your own feet, I continued. If my presence makes you feel inadequate, then perhaps you haven't grown as much as you think. He tried to apologize, awkwardly, quickly, but apologies without understanding are meaningless. That night after he left, I sat alone in the house I'd built, surrounded by a life I'd created with discipline and sacrifice, and for the first time I asked myself a question I'd avoided for years. Had my love made him weaker instead of stronger? Because if it had, then loving him differently was no longer optional. And the next step I took wouldn't be as quiet as the ones before. It would be decisive. And it would change the balance of power forever. The shift didn't happen loudly. There was no dramatic announcement, no raised voice, no grand reveal. Power almost never announces itself, it moves quietly and then everyone feels it at once. The morning after my conversation with Ethan, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not revenge. Focus. The kind that comes when you finally stop explaining yourself to people who were never listening. I went into my home office just after sunrise, the same room where I'd signed contracts while Ethan did homework at the kitchen table. The same desk where I'd made decisions that shaped livelihoods, not dinner plans. I hadn't retreated into this space in a long time, not because I couldn't, but because I'd allowed myself to be reduced to just his mother. That ended that morning. By 9 o'clock, my assistant Melissa had already flagged 3 urgent messages. One from a board member, one from a legal advisor, and one, predictably, from Harold Clark. He didn't leave a voicemail. Men like him rarely do when they're afraid of how they'll sound. Instead, he sent an email requesting a brief meeting to clarify a misunderstanding. I smiled when I read it. A misunderstanding. That was what humiliation became when the balance of power shifted. I agreed to meet him Monday morning, 9 o'clock sharp, on my terms, at my office. That weekend, the story traveled faster than I ever could have. In certain circles, news doesn't spread through gossip, it spreads through panic. Vanessa's family started calling people, quietly, carefully, trying to understand how they'd miscalculated so badly, why no one had warned them, why her father hadn't known. The answer was simple: I never advertised who I was. And people who underestimate quiet women rarely bother to ask. Monday morning arrived with a gray sky and steady rain, the kind that makes the city feel smaller, more exposed. I dressed simply. Dark suit. No jewelry except my wedding ring, not because I needed to impress anyone, but because I didn't. At exactly 8:57 a.m., Melissa knocked on my door. "He's here," she said softly. I nodded. "Send him in." Harold Clark walked in alone, no entourage, no confidence, no charm, just a man realizing too late that the room he'd walked into wasn't his. "Judith," he began, forcing a smile that never quite settled. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice." I gestured to the chair across from my desk but didn't rise. "Let's be efficient," I said calmly. "What would you like clarified?" He cleared his throat. "There seems to have been some confusion at the wedding." I waited. "You see, my daughter, well, emotions were high and words were said that—" "Stop," I said gently. He froze. "We're not here to discuss emotions," I continued. "We're here to discuss facts." I slid a folder across the desk toward him. Inside were documents he already knew existed, but hoped he wouldn't have to face. Ownership structure, voting power, board resolutions. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. "I assume you now understand my position," I said. He nodded stiffly. "Yes, fully." "Good, then let me be clear," I continued. "I didn't come to you because of what your daughter said. I came because of what it revealed." He frowned. "Your family," I said evenly, "has grown comfortable confusing money with superiority. That's not a personal flaw, it's a cultural one. But it becomes my concern when it affects the company." He leaned forward. "Judith, whatever my daughter did is irrelevant," I cut in. "What matters is what you do next." The room felt heavy now, pressurized. "I'm not here to punish," I said. "I'm here to correct." He swallowed. "I expect professionalism," I continued. "Inside this building, outside it, from every person connected to your name." "Of course," he said quickly. "Absolutely. Good," I replied. "Then we're aligned." I stood, signaling the meeting was over. As he rose, something broke through his composure. "Judith," he said quietly, "I had no idea." I met his eyes for the first time. "That," I said calmly, "is the problem." He left without another word. By noon, the ripple effects were impossible to ignore. Phones rang, meetings were canceled, whispers filled hallways that had never known uncertainty. Vanessa's family was suddenly cautious. The laughter had disappeared. That afternoon, my phone finally rang with a number I hadn't saved but recognized immediately. "Vanessa." I let it ring, not out of cruelty, out of necessity. Because some lessons don't land unless silence gives them space. I sat back in my chair, looking out at the city below, and felt something unfamiliar settle into my chest. Not triumph, not satisfaction, alignment. For the first time in years, the way people treated me finally matched who I was. But there was one person left who hadn't fully grasped what had changed. My son. And the conversation I was about to have with him would be far more difficult than any boardroom negotiation. Because power is easy to reclaim in business. In family, it costs much more, and what Ethan was about to confess would force me to decide how much that cost truly was. Vanessa called again the next morning. This time, she left a voicemail. Her voice was different, quieter, thinner, stripped of the confidence she wore so comfortably at the wedding. "Mrs. Lawson, this is Vanessa. I know I shouldn't have said what I did. I was nervous and I made a joke that came out wrong. I hope we can talk." I listened to the message twice. Then I set my phone down and stared at the wall, because there it was, the first apology. And somehow it managed to say nothing at all. I was nervous. It came out wrong. Not I humiliated you, not I disrespected the woman who paid for my wedding, not I believed lies without question, just discomfort. Just damage control. By noon, there was a second message. This one longer, more polished. "Ethan is really upset. He didn't realize things would be taken this way. My parents are stressed. We'd really like to clear the air as a family." As a family, I wondered when exactly I had stopped being one. I didn't respond. Silence, I've learned, is not punishment, it's a mirror. And I wanted Vanessa to sit with her reflection a little longer. That afternoon, my son came over unannounced. I heard his car in the driveway before the doorbell rang. The same car I'd helped him buy. The same keys I'd watched him fumble with as a teenager. He looked exhausted when I opened the door. Pale, unsteady. "Mom," he said, "can we talk?" I stepped aside and let him in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where he'd once done homework while I reviewed contracts. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said it. "She didn't mean it." I didn't react. "She was nervous," he continued quickly. "You know how her family is, they joke like that, it wasn't personal." I folded my hands in front of me. "Ethan," I said quietly. She pointed at me, she invited laughter. "Explain to me how that wasn't personal." He looked away. "She's apologized." "No," I corrected gently. "She's excused herself." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Mom, this is getting bigger than it needs to be. Bigger. As if humiliation has a size limit." "Your father used to say something," I replied. "He said problems don't get bigger on their own, people make them bigger by refusing to face them." That got his attention. "Do you know what she said about me?" I asked. He hesitated. I didn't wait for his answer. "She called me something you should never let anyone call your mother, and she did it because she believed you would let her." "That's not fair," he snapped. "I never told her to do that." "No," I agreed. "You just taught her it would be safe." The room went very quiet. I watched the realization flicker across his face, not fully formed yet, but close. Then his phone buzzed. Vanessa's name lit up the screen. He didn't answer it. Instead, he said something that confirmed everything I feared. "She's scared, Mom. Her family is scared. Her father thinks you're punishing them." I leaned back in my chair. "I'm not punishing anyone," I said evenly. "I'm responding. By not answering her calls, by letting her feel what it's like to not be in control." He rubbed his temples. "She wants to apologize properly. In person." I looked at him for a long moment. "Does she?" I asked. "Or does she want to fix the consequences?" He didn't answer. That evening, Vanessa finally showed up, not alone. Her mother waited in the car. Vanessa stood on my doorstep, shoulders tense, eyes red, posture careful. Gone was the woman who'd laughed easily in a ballroom. "I'm sorry," she said quickly before I could speak. "I was cruel. I shouldn't have said what I did. It was wrong." I studied her face. "I believe you regret it," I said calmly. Her eyes brightened. "Thank you. But regret," I continued, "is not the same as understanding." Her smile faltered. "You didn't insult me because you were nervous," I said. "You insulted me because you believed I deserved it." "That's not true," she whispered. "It is," I replied. "Because no one insults someone they see as an equal." She swallowed hard. "I thought," she began, then stopped. "Thought what?" I asked. She hesitated, then finally said it. "I thought you were just his mother." The words landed softly, but their meaning was heavy. I nodded once. "And that belief," I said, "came from somewhere?" Her eyes flicked toward Ethan. He stiffened. "I didn't," he started. "You did," I said, not unkindly. "You didn't defend me because you'd already reduced me." Vanessa's voice trembled. "I didn't know you were who you are," I smiled faintly. "That's the problem," I said. "You thought worth needed credentials." She looked ashamed now. Genuinely. "I'm sorry," she said again. "Truly." I believed her this time. "But belief doesn't erase consequences." "I accept your apology," I said, "but acceptance doesn't mean restoration." Her breath caught. "What does that mean?" It means trust doesn't return just because someone asks for it. She nodded slowly. I understand, she whispered. Ethan looked between us, panic rising. So, what happens now? I stood. Now, I said calmly, we stop pretending this was just about a joke. Because beneath that apology, beneath the embarrassment and fear, there was a truth even darker than disrespect. And the very next day, that truth would walk into my house uninvited. What my son was hiding would shatter the last illusion I still had about him. And once I learned it, there would be no going back. The next morning, my house felt different. Quieter, heavier. It was the kind of silence that doesn't calm you, it warns you. I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing a coffee cup I hadn't finished when I heard the front door open. No knock, no announcement, just the sound of a key turning, slow and uncertain. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Mom, Ethan called softly. I dried my hands and faced him. He looked like he hadn't slept. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes rimmed with red, his confidence, what little of it remained, completely gone. We need to talk, he said. I nodded. Yes, we do. He sat at the table without waiting to be invited. His hands were shaking. I didn't tell you everything last night, he admitted. Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. I assumed that, I said calmly. Start talking. He swallowed hard. Vanessa, she didn't just find out about the tension between you and her family. She found paperwork. I didn't speak. Financial paperwork. The words settled heavily between us. What kind of paperwork? I asked. He hesitated too long. Ethan, I said quietly, this is the moment where you stop protecting yourself and start respecting me. He closed his eyes. I'm in trouble, he whispered. I waited. I've been in trouble for a while. The truth came out slowly at first, like a crack spreading through glass. Credit cards, loans, bills he'd hidden, expenses he couldn't explain. I wanted to keep up, he said, voice breaking, with her world. With her family, everyone seemed so effortless and I didn't want to look small. I felt a familiar ache, one I'd ignored too many times before. How much? I asked. He flinched. Tell me, I repeated. Over 100,000, he said barely above a whisper. The room felt suddenly too small. And whose name is on those accounts? I asked. He didn't answer. I already knew. You used mine, I said. He nodded. I didn't think you'd ever find out. I let out a slow breath, not anger, not shock, but something colder. You didn't just disrespect me, I said evenly. You risked my livelihood. I was going to fix it, he said quickly. Once I got settled, once I proved myself, once. You don't fix lies by stacking more of them on top, I interrupted. He collapsed into the chair, his shoulders sagging. I was ashamed, he said. Every time you helped me, I felt weaker. Like I wasn't the man I was supposed to be, so I kept pretending. Pretending. That word echoed in my mind, pretending to be successful, pretending to be independent, pretending to be grateful, all while resenting the woman who made his pretending possible. You blamed me for the very thing you depended on, I said quietly. He nodded, tears spilling freely now. I know. I stood and walked to the window, needing space to breathe. Outside, the world continued on, cars passing, people living their lives, unaware that mine had just shifted again. You let your wife believe I was controlling, I said without turning around. You let her family mock me. And all the while you were drowning. I didn't want to disappoint you, he said. I turned back to him. You disappointed me the moment you chose deception over honesty. That landed. I raised you to stand on your own, I continued. But I never raised you to step on me to do it. He nodded again, broken now. What are you going to do? He asked quietly. The fear in his voice was unmistakable. I returned to the table and sat across from him. This, I said, is where things change permanently. He stiffened. I will not cover for you, I continued. I will not lie for you, and I will not protect you from consequences you created. His breath caught. Are you going to turn me in? I studied his face, the boy I'd raised, the man he'd become, the stranger sitting across from me. I'm going to do what's right, I said, for both of us. That scared him more than anger ever could. We'll involve professionals, I continued. Lawyers, financial advisors, whatever it takes to clean this up legally. And me, he asked. You'll take responsibility, I replied. Every dollar, every decision, every lie. He nodded slowly. And if Vanessa leaves, he whispered. That, I said gently, will be the consequence of marrying her without truth. Silence filled the room again. Finally, he said something that nearly broke me. I don't know who I am without pretending. I softened, but only slightly. Then this, I said, is where you finally find out. As he left that morning, I remained at the table long after the door closed. I wasn't grieving the loss of money. I was grieving the son I thought I knew. But grief, I've learned, can either paralyze you or sharpen you. And the next choice I made would decide which one it became. Because uncovering the truth is only the beginning. What you do after the truth, that's where character is revealed, and my next decision would leave no room for confusion. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was afraid of what I'd do next, but because I finally understood what had to be done. For years, I'd confused love with protection. I believed shielding Ethan from discomfort was kindness. I told myself that stepping in, smoothing things over, paying what he couldn't was what a good mother did. But sitting alone in the dark, replaying his confession, I saw the truth with painful clarity. Protection had become permission. Silence had become consent, and love without limits had become harm. By morning, my decision was made. I called my attorney first, not in anger, not in panic, with calm precision. I laid everything out, every account, every document, every forgery. I listened carefully as he explained the legal risks, the options, the consequences. When he finished, there was a pause. "You're sure about this?" he asked gently. Many parents choose to quietly absorb the damage. "I'm sure," I replied. Quiet absorption is how this happened. We set a plan in motion, one that would protect my name and my company without erasing Ethan's responsibility. It wasn't merciful, it wasn't vengeful, it was fair. That afternoon, I met Ethan again. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, not physically, emotionally. Like someone standing in the aftermath of a storm he'd finally realized he caused. I told him everything. The repayment plan, the oversight, the conditions. I told him he would keep his job but under scrutiny, that his finances would be monitored, that every dollar would be repaid, that there would be no more quiet rescues. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked one question. "Are you cutting me off?" I looked at him carefully. "No," I said. "I'm cutting off the version of me that made this possible." He nodded slowly, absorbing that. "And Vanessa?" he asked. "That's not my decision," I replied. "It never should have been." She moved out 2 days later, not dramatically, not with screaming or accusations. She packed quietly and went back to her parents' home. Before she left, she asked to see me. She didn't come with excuses this time, or fear, just honesty. "I didn't marry who I thought I did," she said softly, "and I didn't respect who I should have." I appreciated that she didn't ask for forgiveness. "I hope you don't think I'm heartless," she added. "I was raised to believe power was loud. I didn't know what quiet strength looked like." I studied her for a long moment. "You're learning," I said. "That's more than many people ever do." She nodded. "I'm sorry." "I know," I replied, and I meant it. Her parents, on the other hand, stayed silent, businesslike, distant, careful. They complied with every professional expectation I set, but the warmth was gone. The entitlement, too, respect replaced it. The kind earned through boundaries, not generosity. As for Ethan, the change didn't come overnight. It came slowly. Awkwardly, painfully, he stopped asking for help and started asking questions. Real ones, about budgeting, about responsibility, about what it meant to build something instead of borrowing from it. Some days he resented me. Other days he thanked me. I didn't measure progress by affection anymore. I measured it by integrity. Months passed. The company stabilized. The debt shrank. The noise faded. And one evening, as I sat alone in my living room, I realized something surprising. I felt peaceful. Not because everything was fixed, but because nothing was hidden anymore. That's the thing about consequences. When delivered with clarity instead of cruelty, they don't destroy relationships. They reveal which ones were real to begin with. And as I prepared to make one final decision, one that would define the rest of my life, I understood something I wished I'd learned sooner. You can love someone deeply and still refuse to save them from themselves. The final chapter of this story isn't about revenge, it's about dignity. And the lesson I carried forward, one I hope you never forget, is that self-respect is not selfish. It's necessary, and it's never too late to claim it. There was one final thing left to do, not for Ethan, not for Vanessa, Not for her family, for me. 3 weeks after everything settled, after the debt plans were signed, after the separation papers were quietly filed, after the board stopped whispering and started listening, I hosted a small dinner. Nothing extravagant, no crystal chandeliers, no champagne towers, just a long wooden table, warm light, and the people who mattered. Ethan came early. He looked different now. Tired, yes, but clearer. Like someone who had finally stopped running. "Thank you for inviting me," he said, standing awkwardly near the doorway like a guest instead of a son who once owned the place emotionally. "You're always welcome," I replied. "Just not entitled?" He nodded. He didn't argue. That told me more than any apology ever could. When everyone was seated, I stood, not to lecture, not to accuse, but to tell the truth. "I spent many years believing my value came from what I could provide," I began. "Money, access, stability. I thought that was how I earned love." No one interrupted. I was wrong. Love that only exists when it's funded isn't love, it's a transaction. Ethan swallowed hard. "I failed in some ways as a mother," I continued calmly. "Not because I didn't give enough, but because I didn't stop when giving became harmful." I turned to him then. "This is the last time I will rescue you, but it's also the first time I truly respect you." His eyes filled with tears, not the dramatic kind, the quiet, adult kind. After dinner, when the plates were cleared and the room softened with silence, I handed him a single envelope. He froze. "I'm not cutting you out," I said before he could panic. "But I'm not leaving you everything either." Inside was a document, not a will, but a trust outline, conditional, purposeful, earned. "You'll receive support only when you prove responsibility, not perfection." Responsibility? He read it twice. Then he did something I hadn't seen in years. He stood up and hugged me, not like a child clinging, like a man grateful. Weeks later, the story quietly spread, not the insult. Not the wedding scene, but the outcome. People talked not about humiliation, but about accountability. About a woman who didn't scream, didn't retaliate publicly, didn't destroy, but redefined power. Vanessa sent one final message months later. "I'm rebuilding, slowly. Thank you for not becoming the villain I expected." I never replied. Some chapters don't need answers. And now, when I look at myself in the mirror, I don't see the woman they mocked. I see the woman they underestimated. I learned something late in life, but I learned it fully. You don't owe access to people who disrespect you. You don't owe silence to people who harm you. And you don't owe sacrifice to anyone who mistakes your kindness for weakness. If you're listening to this right now and wondering whether it's too late to draw boundaries, it's not. If you're afraid that standing up for yourself will cost you love, let it. Because love that disappears when you demand respect was never love to begin with. Thank you for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. I read them all. And remember this: sometimes the most powerful moment in your life is the moment you stop explaining and start choosing yourself.